Hey everyone, in today's episode I've got Eric Siron back on the show, and we're doing another one of our monthly threat report episodes. In these episodes we kind of look at the cybersecurity industry over the past 30, 40, 50 days, provide some commentary, we have some discussions. In today's episode we're going to be focusing on some email security statistics over the last 30 days. We're also going to talk about the recent updates regarding the Storm 0558 breach. We're going to talk about the CitrixBleed vulnerability that impacted Citrix NetScalers, that and lots more coming up on today's episode of the Security Swarm podcast. Well, everyone, welcome back for another episode of the Security Swarm podcast, the podcast that brings you the knowledge and insights straight from the security lab here at Hornet Security. As always, I'm your host, Andy Sirwich, and I've got a returning face today with me. I've got Eric Siron. How's it going, Eric?
Doing well. How are you doing?
Doing good. Hey, it's always good having you on the show with me, my friends. I have to apologize, and apologize to the listeners as well, too. As I'm sure everybody can tell, I have this lovely, sexy, fall-time voice, right? Just getting over bronchitis, so I'm hoping my voice will last the full 30-ish minutes that our episodes usually last. So I think we're good, though. So anyway, today, Eric, before I get to that, for those that may not have watched an episode with you in it, because I think it's been a while since we've had you on the show, can you give us a quick introduction to yourself, Eric?
Sure. Yeah, I'm currently a Microsoft MVP, Cloud and Data Center Management. I have been in IT for about 25 years, spent most of my time working with small and medium businesses, and have been, in the last 10 years or so, working with much larger, up to a 20,000 seat hospital. Very strong healthcare focus recently.
So you've got the joy of working in a highly regulated environment, which is always fun. So, appreciate you taking the time to be here, my friend. So we've got an interesting episode today. So for those folks that have watched our show for a period of time, you know that once a month we do kind of a monthly threat report episode, right? So basically, once a month here at Hornet Security, we go and we look at all of our data and we look at the state of the cybersecurity industry, and we publish, our monthly threat review. And in this review, we go over some of the data, we provide some commentary on the happenings in the industry, and it's a good report, right? And we also do a podcast episode like this one that covers that information, but in more of a discussional format, because not everybody loves, reading through a written report, right? So I figure what we do is we would start with all of our usual data points, right? And one of the things that we keep an eye on here at Hornet Security is all of the emails that are flowing through our filters. We're classifying them, right? Clean, spam, rejected, threat, advanced threat, right? All that type of stuff. And one of the things that we're always looking for is, how are those fluctuating from month to month? And what we saw during the data period for this report, so the data period that we're talking about here is essentially the month of October. And when we compare it with the previous month, we saw during this data period that spam messages are up, just general spam, right, is up over the data period, while those emails that are classified as threats and or advanced threats are slightly down. So the number of threats are down. We're getting a higher volume of junk messages via the spam category, right? That all said, when we look at our metrics, our numbers, the state of email security, we're at like DEFCON 3 or 4, right? So the threats in terms of email security are high, even though we saw a slight reduction in threats and advanced threats. And this is going to come up a couple of times during this episode, is the holidays. So the holidays play a role here, and we're going to get into that. But before I move on to the next data point, Eric, do you have any kind of thoughts around this particular data point before I move on?
Yeah, this is always the fun part, is up and down, month over month, year over year, whatever. What does that actually mean to people?
Mm-hmm.
So, in a lot of the cases I'm at is like, if we drop from 2,000 attempts an hour to 1,900 attempts an hour, what do we make of that?
Right.
And I actually, it's interesting. I love kind of digging into these, but then, practical in the seat. What has changed for me? I don't really know. So it's one of the reasons we're glad to have the researchers out there asking these questions and looking into them, because what has changed?
Right, right, exactly. And yeah, so I mean, like you said, you got that ebb and flow of the threat landscape from month to month, right? And the holidays always bring different traffic, and we're going to get into that a little bit here and some of the other data points. And I think the other thing that I could see the spam category possibly being used for is, like, think about all those extra junk type messages you get from organizations coming
Mhm.
up to the holidays, like, oh hey, holiday sale here, holiday sale there, oh hey, donate over here, right? So there's just a larger volume of messages in that regard as well too, that while not malicious can be classified as spam, right?
People are becoming distracted as we get closer, and they're likely to, some of their common sense cards are going to drop a little bit.
Yep, very true, very true. So the next item we have on our list of statistics here is, we always, when we're looking at our email security filters, what types of files are being used as attachments to try and deliver malicious payloads, right? And big offender on the list this month, like it is every month, is PDF files. Not really a surprise there. Now, what's interesting about this is the use of PDF files has risen over the last month. And we used to be able to attribute changes in PDF file usage due to the QuakeBot botnet, which, as our listeners will know, was disrupted by the law enforcement agencies of the world back in July, I think it was, if memory serves correctly. So I'd have to double check this, but I think we saw a reduction in PDF file usage temporarily after that happened, but now it's on the rise again. And we can attribute that to, some post-QuakeBot botnets that are starting to pop up, such as the Darkgate botnet/malware. Darkgate loves to use PDF files. The interesting thing about Darknet is, Darkgate is starting to focus more on delivery of payloads via instant messaging. So Teams, WhatsApp, we're starting to see it kind of play in that space quite a bit, but we still do see PDF files coming through via the Darkgate malware in PDF format, right? So PDFs are something that organizations tend to use, right, Eric? I know especially the healthcare space has to use PDFs quite a bit, I'm guessing.
It does, and I think we've spoken sort of about healthcare changes in the past. We've already have a fundamental problem of sending information through email.
Right.
So we have already had to fight against PDFs even for legitimate purposes in
Right.
email.
Right.
So yes, the concern is always very strong. I think as an industry, we have more moved toward, let's use centralized, like the electronic medical record systems have their own forms
Right.
that you use as a client. It comes up on your phone, on your web browser, or when you're in the office, they may just turn a panel toward you and have you screen tap something there. So I think we are switching away from universal format documents. And it's not
Right.
just for the reason of malware, but it is having a side effect of helping that too.
Right. Kind of a plus there, right? Of having to make that switch, but you also get that side benefit, which is nice. So, well, speaking of regulated industries, another area that we look at on a month-to-month basis is our basically our email threat index. So we take a look at all of the different organizations, the types of organizations that we are providing email filtration services for, and we can actually tell based on our data what industries are being targeted more than others, and that's what this email threat index is. If you're interested in how that that calculation is made. Take a look at the report. I've got links to actually how that calculation is made for those math-minded folks out there that are listening. But basically, what we saw during this data period is that the research industry has seen the most significant increase in attacks during the data period for this particular review. And we saw basically every other industry vertical kind of go down a little bit, but research is up. The research industry tends to be in the top 3 or 4 every single month. This month it's first. And we always are able to attribute that to the fact that when you are an organization working in the research field, you've got, intellectual property is in play, right? And so if I'm a threat actor and I gain access to that intellectual property, I can ransom it, I can, threaten to divulge it to the public using, basically a double extortion attack at that point. Maybe I'm working for a government, some nation state government that wants that information for some reason. Or maybe I go and try to sell it to your competitors. I mean, there's all kinds of different reasons why that might be the case, right? And
you gotta be able to get your hands on something before anybody else does.
Oh, for sure. And it's like I said, it pops up near the top of the report every single month. And like you said, Eric, it's just they're always dealing with that intellectual property. There's always something valuable there, and they can make a dollar using it some way, shape, or form, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, any additional thoughts on that one before we move on to some of the news-related items?
Well, we could keep expanding on all the things that you use stolen research for.
Right?
I'm thinking like just knowing in advance what a competitor is doing, like could Intel sell information on AMD, or would Intel buy information on AMD? Like, they're legitimate companies. They're probably not doing that. I don't know.
That's a good point. I mean, corporate espionage, people talk about it all the time, but
and it is a thing. I mean, now
right.
I have contacts in government law enforcement, and yes, it is a thing. You will get people embedded in one corporation who will feed information to others. This happens.
Right.
It's a big thing. And of course, the bigger your corporation is, the more they can afford to have that sort of, your 5-user shops probably don't have room for a professional spy on the payroll.
Probably not. Unless you are professional spy as a service, PSAS. Professional spy as a service. Unless that's what you're doing. Right. I'm sure somebody's doing that somewhere, right? So that's probably not the acronym.
It's, as we say, there's a lot of money in it. No one, basically knowing the future in a lot of ways, because, as an MVP, that we get the inside scoop on some things that Microsoft is thinking about doing.
That's true.
And we only get it after it's already gone to a certain level of, internal vetting. Microsoft has to make their own decisions, or is this even a viable thing to pursue? So somewhere up there, that's super valuable information. Somebody's probably always looking for it.
Yeah.
Get it out, and if they're not doing it to sell to a competitor, they're doing it just to publish, to just say, "Hey, look what we found out." Remember the time the guy picked up that iPhone that one of the engineers had left behind in a bar?
Oh, right? That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Too is like they weren't trying to go with the competitor, but just having the advanced knowledge of the next iPhone is in itself a valuable thing to have.
Right.
And so take that across all of your various industries, and I can totally see why research and development would be where the...
Yep, makes sense. So, the final data area, that we look at regularly on a monthly basis before we get to our news items is around brand impersonation attempts. And 'tis the season for brand impersonation attempts because of the holidays coming up, right? So here in the U.S., you got Thanksgiving and you got Christmas and all the different various holidays around the world. Threat actors know this, right? So they try to capitalize on the holidays. And as expected, we see this every year here at Hornet Security, shipping and finance brands have seen an increase in brand impersonation attempts. So MasterCard, DHL remains the largest offender on the list. FedEx, all those shipping brands and finance brands are seeing large increases. And that's because, I always use myself as an example. We do so much shopping online here in my family that we have a box showing up on the doorstep 3 or 4 days out of the week, right? And that just increases across the board for everyone around the holidays and the number of online transactions. Threat actors try to inject themselves into those patterns, right? Because they know if they can land a malicious email in somebody's inbox at just the right moment, that they've got a high chance of it being interacted with. And I mean, you probably see that ebb and flow in the healthcare space too, right, Eric? I mean, not with the holidays, but, when you guys have a lot of stuff going on, you probably see more junk coming into the organization too, I imagine. That's an assumption.
Yeah, there's that. I'm actually not privy to those. I do not personally work in that stream of security, so I don't actually know.
Gotcha.
I mean, but like I say, so much of what we do now, it's almost like if you get an email from us and it's anything other than like, how was your experience?
Right.
It's already suspect. We're not going to send you a bill and email. We're going to send it through your EMR. We'll send you a note, but we might send you an email saying you have a new bill to look at.
Right.
So I could absolutely see us being impersonated, but like you said, it wouldn't have anything to do with the holidays.
Right.
And into the organization, I mean, healthcare is not seasonal, really.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure there's some niche parts of it that are, but the general healthcare organization's sick is sick.
Right.
You get the flu, but then the flu goes away, and so on and so forth. So,
and I guess that kind of speaks to my point a little bit, is that whatever the target, in this case the general public, because it's the holidays, whatever the target, there are always processes and behaviors for threat actors to try and plug into, right?
Yeah. If you watch the industry close enough, you'll find some, and I had just said, oh, healthcare's not seasonal, and immediately went to the flu, which is seasonal. So if you found a way to go, oh, hey, we have your flu vaccination ready for you. Or
right.
Yeah, there would be things that hit, just have to watch that industry and feel like there's money to be made on it, which, I don't know, common vaccines like the flu vaccine don't make a lot of money, so I don't really know that that's a great place to go, but surely there's something.
Right. Yeah, it's always interesting to see the ebbs and flows. So, well, now we get to the non-data portion of the report and more of the news commentary point of the report. And these reports used to be easier when I put them together because the security news cycle wasn't so crazy. But now it's like, okay, instead of the 3 or 4 security stories I'm going to talk about, it's become, what are the 3 or 4 worst security stories that I'm going to talk about, right? And we've got some interesting ones this month. So the first one I'm going to start with is the Storm 0558 breach with Microsoft. Folks that have been regular listeners know that we've covered this issue ad nauseum on this show. So I'm not going to rehash the whole thing here. In a nutshell, if you're not familiar with this breach, basically what it comes down to is that nation-state threat actors procured a consumer signing key from Microsoft, used it to forge authentication tokens into Microsoft Cloud Services, and lifted a bunch of information out of the U.S. State Department. The U.S. State Department is actually the organization that notified Microsoft of the issue. There's been a whole thing around this. So again, I'll link a couple of episodes been in the show description for this episode. And Paul Schnackenberg and I have done a couple episodes that focused heavily on Storm 0558, if you're interested. That said, the update that recently came out was that Microsoft had promised some enhanced logging capabilities, and they are now starting to roll those out. So the big criticism is like, okay, should logging be put behind a paywall? That's a big question that a lot of folks in the industry are starting to ask, right? And Microsoft took a lot of flack over this because, like, unless I was paying for the premium logging, I would have had no idea this attack was occurring. So I think it's good on them that they're making it right, but it still begs the question, should it have been that way in the first place? So Paul and I have had some strong opinions on this over a couple of episodes, Eric, and I don't know what your thoughts are, but what do you think?
The double-edged sword. Microsoft is a company trying to make money, trying to figure out how to monetize the products that they have. There's a saying I use very frequently: never attribute anything to malice that can be adequately explained by stupidity. We're just like this logging thing. A lot of people don't read their logs anyway. We can probably get people with money who have like log parsing tools to pay a little bit extra. They were probably not setting out to say, oh, let's hide an attack from people behind a paywall. I really don't think that happened.
I really doubt that happened, right? And the conversation you laid out was like, okay, most people don't look at their logs anyway. I could see that conversation happening somewhere, but I think that's a good point. Don't assume malice, right? I think that's a good place to start from.
Yeah, don't assume malice. It's going to, and now that it has happened, how they deal with it will be where I would say, are we looking to judge Microsoft in this case? Because they just didn't know. They didn't see it coming, and then bam, it hit them like, oh, okay, oops, well, let's not do that again. And if they choose not to do that again, well, then there we have our answer. Right. But it's going to have to wind through all their legal teams and all their people. Well, if we turn that off, is that admitting that it just gets so messy.
Right.
I'm just glad I don't have to deal with it. I get to sit over here and comment on it. And
right.
It goes out to everybody impacted by this because it's just terrible. No matter where you're sitting, unless you're the folks who manage to steal everything, I guess they got for everybody else.
It's a mess for sure. And that's basically where Paul and I ended up, right? And Paul, he made the good joke, right? And he actually said that like the jokes almost write themselves, right? And that like, oh, you Microsoft couldn't detect this thing because you weren't paying for your own premium logging, right? And, okay. All right. Maybe not so funny, but I thought it was a good one. Anyway, the next item on our list is a doozy, and one that you've had the joy of dealing with yourself, I understand, based on our conversations just before this episode, and that is the CitrixBleed vulnerability. Now, if folks are unaware of what this vulnerability is, basically it affects various Citrix NetScalers, and essentially how it works is a remote attacker is able to get the target device to basically spit out the contents of memory at them. And then they can dig through that memory dump, grab session tokens, and then log into the device without even having to go through MFA because they already have a token, right? They completely bypass the authentication process. So then they can log into the device. And then, I mean, from there, right, there's all kinds of mischief that can be had. Lateral movements, setting up persistence, privilege escalation. I mean, basically they're off to the races at that point, right? So to Citrix's credit, they did release a patch. I believe it was October 10th, if I remember correctly. How was that patching process, by the way, Eric? You recently had to go through it, right?
Yes, and yeah, Citrix had a rough couple months. I will second their engineering team is on it. They're fast. They do quick work. They do thorough work. And they don't enjoy it any more than we do. I know this.
Right. Right.
A NetScaler is an appliance. It's either a physical device or a virtual one, but it is an appliance. So it's running like a Linux core
Yep.
with the NetScaler software on top of it. So it is basically they send you an image file, and then it, you might term it like a firmware update is probably the closest thing.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
so it goes in, but what it's doing is it's patching that image, which the first the Linux is the operating system of the appliance, and then you have the NetScaler components that sit on top of it.
Right.
So
Right.
it's going through and patching that, but it'll update like I don't think Java's in there. I can't remember, but there's like a Python component, I think, things like that. So
Right.
it's large, it's detailed, it takes time. The organization I'm responsible for has redundant systems built in, and you've got to go through every single one of them. Killing the sessions part is actually pretty simple, and I was kind of curious, like, is there a way to actually fully patch it without killing all of the sessions? This might be something I'd like to research. Is there something?
And I
Because
thought that right, right. And I thought that part that advice was very interesting, and it's very telling to the style of attack, right? And
yeah,
that
as long as the session is alive, the token port is good.
right,
But even
exactly.
if you patch a vulnerability so they can no longer pull a token, if they've already got one, they could continue exploiting it. So you would have to kill the session to make sure the token died.
Yep,
But that's what
exactly.
they're telling you. But of course, we were sitting there like, as far as we can tell, we do kill all the sessions in every patch cycle. So, okay.
And I thought that was the interesting part, was because you see some people out there like, well, I applied the patch, good to go, right?
Right.
But they
actually apply. And it doesn't, it's not like this is, I mean, there is a point on it to reboot at the end, but otherwise it's going to sit there going, got to reboot.
right, right.
So you're not done until you have rebooted the system.
Yep. And I just thought it was so interesting in their document, their how-to documentation for this vulnerability, like kill the sessions, right? Like kill them with fire.
Yeah.
Like
And like logically I understand that, but how are we not killing the sessions at the point that we bring the appliance down? And we have all sorts of systems we use to test it, and you're like, okay, my connection has dropped, and now my connection is reestablished. Right?
I wonder how much of this is them being afraid that people are going to apply the patch and then forget to reboot. And then if they...
It's got to happen. It has to happen. So
right. Interesting.
So
yeah.
Let this be a lesson to you. Always... I would do that anyway. I think it's just a good idea, because if you got sessions stale held that survive from one software version to the next, and you're talking about your Citrix NetScaler is just a pass-through device. It's not doing anything other than passing information across its boundaries.
Right.
But if its software suddenly starts working differently, it's got different signatures and everything else. Like, I would just kill those sessions out of this is a thing that just makes sense. Because if the very next call that comes in because everything that happens inside a remote session is somehow Citrix's fault from the client's perspective, because they're like, I connect to Citrix and then I try to do this and it doesn't work. It must be Citrix's fault.
Right.
Okay. So knowing that the first call is going to hit the Citrix line, like, I'm going to have cleared all of the caches. I'm going to have knocked all that out, because I want to be able to say we did our due diligence.
Yep.
We did our testing. All of our testing is clear. We'll look at it, but it's probably a problem with the app, and it just happened to manifest in the section.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting, because I mean, most vulnerabilities, it's like, oh, here's your patch. But I just thought I remember that kind of sticking out to me as like they actually
before in the Citrix patches, whenever it's a security issue, they're like, be sure to kill your sessions now.
So maybe that's just a due diligence thing on their part, right?
Like their lawyers are probably like, is there any chance? And they're like, well, we'll just say it.
To be on the safe side, right?
On the safe side, yeah. But
interesting.
But I will also go, it's just a due diligence thing. When you're doing something that's that invasive. Because Citrix NetScaler patches are a big deal. They're not difficult as such things go, but they are not trivial either. So.
Yep. So the advice I've been thinking of since this vulnerability kind of came out is it just brought back the whole thing that I used to see a lot in my MSP days. So I'd walk into a new customer, right? And this customer was doing all the right things in terms of server security, endpoint security, cloud services security, oh, hey, those Cisco switches or those Dell switches or whatever, and your server rack, when was the last time those things were patched? I don't know, what, 2, 3 years ago? So it's like those appliances on your network need to be treated with the same level of care as everything else in your security posture, right?
Absolutely.
And that applies to IoT devices as well. IoT devices as well.
And they're some of the worst. So yes, they should be pretty much the ones that you panic about the most.
For sure. For sure. So, well, the last item on our list for today's episode is this is a fun one too, but from a different perspective, right? And I'm talking about the Security and Exchange Commission's choice to bring charges against SolarWinds and SolarWinds CISO at the time for the 2020 Sunburst incident. So, folks, remember that one. That's one of those incidents that feels both simultaneously like it was, a few weeks ago and a really long time ago at the same time. So, what's so interesting about this is one of the first times, at least the first time I can think of myself, in that we actually have seen charges brought against an individual inside of one of these organizations that has suffered a major data breach, right? So I always look at these types of things through the lens of the larger cybersecurity landscape. And we've seen an increased trend in governments, governing bodies, governing agencies, in my opinion, starting to lose patience with the continued rush of security issues that organizations have been having, right? So the examples I always think of are in Australia. I don't remember exactly what the fines are now, but the fines for organizations that don't take, I forget their wording, commiserate security, what do they, if they don't take the proper steps to secure their stuff, basically, they are subject to huge fines, massive fines.
Wow.
The Storm 0558 breach I just got done talking about, that was taken on by the Department of Homeland Security's Cyber Safety Review Board. And that brought an investigation in the U.S. government, not just on that particular issue, but regarding their consumption of cloud services in general. Again, those are just two examples. There's a whole bunch in the EU having to do with GDPR. We have many cases now where, I think governments are just getting sick and tired of this happening again and again and again. So what is so different here is, and what the big question is, and I think why this has kind of raised some eyebrows in the industry is, if I'm a CISO and I am responsible for the security of an organization, and God forbid something terrible happens, like this Sunburst incident with SolarWinds, am I going to want to go be a CISO if there's a potential target on my back for a screw up? I mean, whether they deserved it or not, I'm completely setting that aside, because that's already been talked about to death. But it raises the big question, right? So are we going to lose potential talent in the security industry because people are afraid of legal action for something happen? I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at. What do you think, Eric?
So I am not sure. I should just tell everybody that I'm working toward my master's of business administration right now. So let me say that that's a C level. That's an executive. That is a buck stops here. CISO is, whether you knew or not, is not relevant. You can claim ignorance, and they don't care. You are responsible. This is your responsibility. So if you look outside the security, let's say at the CFO, somebody is embezzling, and then the CFO is like, I didn't know about that. That doesn't matter. That's not the point.
That's true.
You are the financial manager. That is your responsibility. They're not going to listen to you say, I didn't know. They don't care. You're supposed to know.
That's a good
And
point.
let's go now back into our wheelhouse of the CISO is in charge of the information apparatus. And if those things are
Right.
happening and the CISO didn't know, that's just too bad. You are a manager and you have accepted that responsibility by taking a C-level job. So if we are killing talent, the talent that we're killing is either poorly informed on what a C-level does,
Right.
and I can say, okay, sorry, but that is what a C-level does, and you kind of have to research the position you're getting into, and also people that are hiring them. If you're not making it clear that this is a C-level position, you have authority and responsibility as a
Right.
company manager, not a people manager, a company
Manager.
Yes, and yeah, they can call you on the carpet, and as we're seeing, they will do that. And
Right.
the big thing I want to point out, there's a great big gigantic word in there that's only 5 letters, and it's fraud. Now, you can look at the security lapses and go, okay, that is we didn't know. Okay, fraud is not a we didn't know thing. Fraud is
Right.
we knew, and we were trying very hard to hide it. And I
That's
would
a
say in
good
that case,
point.
absolutely, if you're sitting in a C-level chair and you're hiding things, you better expect they're going to come for you. They
Right.
will. And if you look at a lot of the big cases where you're seeing names of people in companies, fraud is usually somewhere on the docket.
Right.
And that is why they're going after this individual. Is they're like, not only did you screw up, you tried to then brush it under the rug and pretend it didn't happen or
And hide it.
I don't know actually what the charges are, but
That's a good point.
fraud.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I forgot to mention the fraud word in the initial description of that. No, that's a very good point. And yeah, definitely when fraud is involved, it changes the whole discussion, right?
Yeah.
Because yeah, like you said, if fraud is involved, they knew stuff was going on. And
I can see how you can get there non-maliciously, but I've had a long-standing complaint with a lot of companies who are like, they'll have people, and they're smart people, who will sit down and go through all these thought exercises, and then they'll come up with a plan based on these thought exercises and implement them. And then anybody's looking at going, well, but out here in the real world, this is what happens when you do that. And they don't listen to it. They don't want to hear it. And then
right.
all of a sudden something happens. And then they're looking back at it and like, oh, we actually had people tell us that was a bad idea. And, all of a sudden, basically what happens, a cloud of arrogance has been punctured.
Right.
Right. And this is what has happened. So, and then they're trying to backpedal. Well, I'm not really stupid. I didn't really, it's just the trying to put the cat back in the bag thing. And
Right.
I have no internal knowledge of this whatsoever. I mean, my personal interaction with SolarWinds have been overwhelmingly net negative. I'm not surprised to see this happen to them, but I don't have an internal knowledge. That's what I want to say. I don't know what's happening.
Right. And I think that brings up the good point, right? Is when we look at this strictly from a security professional point of view, if it sounds like they're not, the CISO is not necessarily, we don't know because the court case hasn't played out yet, right? Mm-hmm. But on the surface, it doesn't appear that they are being charged directly because of security negligence. That's not what this appears.
The security lapse phrase is in here, but after the fraud.
So right, the security lapses
across the board, but I think that organizationally would be a lapse.
Right.
And the fraud part is like some human being is going down for that because that is a conscious thing that you don't, you're
right.
doing wrong.
Right.
You have to, you don't accidentally commit fraud.
Right. So, no, it's going to be interesting to see how that one plays out because I know that this has been a conversation that's kind of been happening in the security spaces for as long as I've been involved in the security industry now. And that, when you take how do I want to put it, a high pressure security position, right? That's a high degree of pressure. People don't want to be held responsible if things happen. I mean, and I
thought it was important. In a lot of places, we forget that.
Yeah.
But there's a difference between the director of security and the CISO.
Right. That's very true.
Especially when you're something where the SEC is regulating your industry, you really need to pay attention to titles now.
Yep. That's very true. It'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. So I'm sure this won't be the last time we're talking about it on this show or in the monthly threat review. So, well, that Eric, I think we're about out of time. I want to thank you for taking the time and coming to speak with us today. Your insights, knowledge, and opinions are always valued, my friend.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Definitely. And those of you watching, thanks for spending some time with us. If you found value in today's episode, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button, as they say. We're available out on YouTube and all the major podcasting platforms. So depending on where you like to listen to your podcast, chances are you can find us somewhere. So again, I will include a link to this report that we've been talking about today. I'll put that in the show notes. You can also find that out on hornetsecurity.com. With that, we'll let you get back to your day. Stay safe out there. Have a good one, and we'll talk to you later.